Paying the price for fast fashion, how our desire for cheap clothes is raising big questions for the industry. And the Armageddon mission, the spacecraft heading for an asteroid which could smash into the Earth. I'm Shuli Ghosh. This is Insight. Hello there, welcome to the programme. The fashion world is preparing for the biggest events in its calendar. New York first, then London. Catwalks full of what will become next season's must-have clothes. And you won't have to wait long to get them. Those designs can now go from the drawing board to the shopping mall in a matter of days. It's a trend known as fast fashion, and critics say it's raising big ethical questions for the industry. Insight's Sarah Firth reports.
From high street stores to upmarket boutiques, fashion is focusing in on a better, fairer way to do business. With consumers now smarter and better informed than ever before about the way they shop, mainstream fashion brands have become big on pushing their ethical credentials. But when you can still buy an item of clothing for the same price as a sandwich, is fashion really changing? 3 years on from the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh, when 1,135 people died in what was the worst industrial disaster in modern times. And we investigate whether the fashion industry has cleaned up its act. Sarah Ditty works with campaign group Fashion Revolution and has helped raise consumer awareness, forcing companies to rethink their policies when it comes to the production line.
Many factories in Bangladesh have seen improvements for health and safety and for fire safety. There are certainly more people who are aware about the issues that exist, the social environmental issues, and also just what a supply chain is. But there hasn't been as much positive change as we'd like to see. And again, that's just because the complexity of the problem is an obstacle in of itself.
The Modern Slavery Act, passed in the UK last year, requires large and medium-sized companies to report on what they're doing to eradicate slavery from their supply chains.
What we really need is a little bit more will from the industry, from brands, from retailers, from suppliers, to really honestly look at themselves, to try and map out their supply chains and then share that information with the public. Because that's when the public can actually make informed decisions about what they're purchasing.
Something everyday consumers can take part in is one of Fashion Revolution's social media campaigns with the hashtag #WhoMadeMyClothes. We decided to try that out on a leading fashion retailer, and companies are responding.
Ultimately, we need to know who's making our clothes and under what conditions, because you can't do anything about problems you can't see, ultimately. So once we can see a little bit more clearly what's happening behind the scenes of our clothing, then we'll be able to address the incredibly pressing problems that exist, particularly for workers on the other end of the supply chain.
People Tree's an ethical and fair trading clothing company that says it puts people before profits. This is what consumers want to be looking out for,
yes,
these
exactly.
three here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right, yeah.
Ethical practice encompasses everything from fair pay to basic human rights.
The problem with fast fashion is that it wants to overstep. It wants a race ahead. So very often there are huge compromises made in terms of the labour conditions, pay, the number of hours that people work. It's absolutely usual that people will be working a 14-hour day, often against their wishes. They have to work the overtime, otherwise they lose their jobs. Many of them are not, even given a contract, so they face physical and sexual harassment. So, really, the alternative is slowing fashion down.
New legal requirements have increased transparency and accountability, making it harder for companies not to play their part. Whilst the lure of a quick fashion fix may be difficult to resist, experts are calling on the public to keep up the demand for ethical options and then put their money where their mouth is. Sarah Firth reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Kate Larson, who's the Director of Business for the Unseen, an organisation which tackles conditions for workers in supply chains. Good to have you with us, Kate.
Thank you.
So companies like Peopletree are succeeding in creating ethical fashion. What are they doing that other companies aren't?
They get their team into the production sites. So we still see some retailers these days who will buy through agents and not actually see where workers are working. And then when they go visit, they're not just visiting and having a look at the superficial. I believe Peopletree and many others like them are actually deeply looking at what are the wages, what are the working hours, are there contracts? Do these workers really have the right to set up a trade union if they wish to and not face baseball bat attack, which we have heard of in this industry, and really invest some resources in using human rights experts to go in and investigate first, and then to send a very strong message to the factory owner or the agent in the middle that we expect these decent conditions for workers per our code of conduct and international standards, but actually implemented.
But the big companies, the big
Yes.
brand names are saying that they're doing the same kind of thing.
Many of them are.
They're trying to ensure better wages for workers. They're
Right.
auditing their factories. They have corporate social responsibility.
Yes. Then we get into the second question of what is the price that you're paying. So it's all very well saying I expect you to make sure workers don't need to work 80 hours a week to earn almost a living wage and to be paid legal minimum rates and the overtime and benefits. But if you're not paying the factory enough per piece for that, that's really the dilemma that a lot of the big brands have been facing, is that they've been far more focused on the quarterly results to the street, the city, as you'd say in the finance world, rather than really looking at, are we making sure we're paying enough to the factories?
But isn't
and
there legislation
verifying.
in place to deal with this? I mean, the UK, for example, has legislation which affects large companies.
And we've just seen Sports Direct and others admit that they were not paying legal minimum wages, and let alone the sort of 0 hours contract issue in the UK. So when it gets down the supply chain, it's even murkier. There are at least unions here can actually operate and represent workers. That's a real challenge. There have been many workers trying to unionize and represent themselves in Bangladesh, for example, and had that unapproved by the government and their factories, and in some cases, as I say, been intimidated and harassed. So again, there are multiple steps companies need to take. It's all very well saying, well, we checked, but you checked and you didn't check very deeply, or you checked and you also didn't pay properly.
But is it possible for a company to be in control of every stage of the production
Right.
process, particularly if the companies that they're employing in these developing countries are subcontracting some of the work?
Well, and there's approved subcontracting, and then there's undeclared subcontracting that goes on. So really it is the responsible of a business, if you say as a brand that we know where our product is made, then you're responsible to make sure you know and make sure that your suppliers don't get away with or need to subcontract because you suddenly doubled the orders and expected them to deliver in the same time with the same workforce, which has been a quite common practice. I think you may be also talking about as we get further down the supply chain. So we go from agent to factory to some sort of support facilities, laundries and things, and then we get into fabric mills. Some people would say you can't go there. I can name you 10 brands who do look at labor standards in fabric mills, in that third tier, so to speak. So, which proves it's possible. It takes effort, it takes investment, it takes investing in professionals in your organization and using quality human rights focused third parties to assist.
And as you've already made the point, profits are the bottom line. So,
Yes.
The biggest pressure group could be the consumers, the people
Yes.
who buy these goods.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that most consumers would say they want to see
I agree.
the end to
Yes,
sweatshop
yes,
conditions.
yes.
But do they want to pay more for their products?
It doesn't have to cost more, firstly, although, yes, we probably on average need
If
to
you're
pay a
paying
bit
workers
more.
more, then presumably
I mean,
the goods
people
they
do
produce
actually pay
cost
more already. You know, brands like Zara cost more than H&M, but still sell a lot, still compete very
But
well.
this fast fashion trend must surely be putting pressure on that. People want cheap
Right.
stuff They want it
Yes.
quickly. They want to wear a
They
T-shirt
do.
for 2 months and then chuck
And
it
we
away.
have an ongoing argument in the industry about our brands actually making us used to having too many T-shirts and too many jackets and too many dresses. We, on average, have about 5 times more pieces of clothing than our mother's generation, for example, even in the West. So we don't need it. We throw it away. We have a lot of clothing going to throw away these days. So there's that factor to take into account, that companies have taught us to buy things we don't need in a way. And there needs to be some responsibility there, that maybe they can actually at times realize a certain factory providing on time, but overall you're
So
right,
you
it's
think
not
consumers could
sustainable.
make a difference if they were more vocal
Discretionary.
about what
And then
they
vocal,
want?
absolutely, and we see that change. After Rana Plaza that you just saw in the video, many consumers across Europe and the West and in Asia signed petitions telling brands, we want to see you pay compensation to the people suffering and work on making sure this never happens again. And without that consumer voice, signing petitions of NGOs, of nonprofits, we wouldn't have seen quite such a big contribution to move things forward. So investors are also sending a very strong voice, and all of us, anybody who has a pension fund, can ask your pension fund to speak out in the ways that have a big impact there as well. And then there are smaller ethical fashion brands.
Let's hope it makes a difference.
So-
You're doing some important work. Thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed for talking to us about it. Kate Larson there.
Thank you.
This is Insight. Coming up, how NASA plans to set up a real-life version of the classic arcade game, Asteroids. Stay with us.